G'day guys, welcome to Ranger Touring, and today I'm going to be going through my top 5 tracks that I've done around Australia. Now caveat this, I haven't done every track in Australia, and I haven't been to WA or NT and a few of those other spots, but I'm going to go over the ones that I've done in the last 2 years that I've found were the most exciting and that I'd recommend to other people. I'm also going to go through the difficulty level of the track, what modifications and what vehicles could do the track, and then from there how many days or the distance of the track and how long it should really ideally take to do it properly. So over the last 2 years, I've done mostly Cape York, the High Country, and then a lot of the spots sort of around Brisbane, Townsville, that area there. So I haven't done a lot of New South Wales. It's coming in at number 5. This is probably not a very well-known track. It's out in vicinity of Mackay, and it's the Captain's Crossing track. So there's actually a campsite there, and then you cross over the bridge and it continues on for about 50 kilometers. I didn't complete that, but I did it with about 4 people, and we got about probably a quarter of the way before turning around and coming back to the campsite. It's a spot I really want to go back to. The terrain you're going to run into there is rutted out sections, some pretty intense hill climbs, but probably the biggest challenge of that spot is as soon as it becomes muddy, it becomes pretty chaotic. So that trip was actually the one that encouraged me to buy mud tyres and trade in the all-terrains, because as soon as that track got wet, it just got chopped up completely, and it was quite a rough ride. So I found the Captain's Crossing track on Wiki Camps, trying to find some four-wheel drive tracks. I navigated through it using a HEMA HX1, and we had anyone in the convoy from my car, which is lifted 2 inches, to stock Prados doing the exact same drive. I would encourage you to take recovery gear, and if you're going to attempt it in the wet, I would again go with the mud terrain tyre, because it was quite a hard drive at that stage. Okay, so coming in at number 4, I've got the Bloomfield track. So the Bloomfield track starts at Cape Tribulation, which is about an hour and a half north of Cairns. From there, it's 30 kilometers, and it's mostly a gravel track with some bitumen sections on the steep hills parts. So the Bloomfield track goes through the Daintree rainforest, which, if you haven't been there, is just the most stunning location. Very tropical, very green, and a good opportunity to see some crocodiles as well. So it starts with a quite shallow water crossing, nothing to be worried about. From there, again, the only thing that you're going to need to do is hit those hills hard, because they're quite steep. If you're towing a caravan, I probably wouldn't recommend anything over 2.5 ton. Otherwise, you're probably going to struggle going up some of those hills. If it was wet, again, would probably be a different situation. So the Bloomfield track has a number of stops along the way, a number of beaches to check out, as well as a few lookouts, and it finishes up at Wudgel Wudgel Falls, which again, if you haven't been there before, is just spectacular, and I would highly recommend going there. What kind of vehicle can do it? Pretty much anything. As long as you've got 4-wheel drive and enough clearance to get through that water crossing, you could take pretty much any 4-wheel drive on it. You could probably take stuff like an X-Trail through if the water levels were low enough at that time of the year. It's not a tough track whatsoever, it's just steep. So coming in at number 3, we've got Billy Goat's Bluff track. I've done this track twice out of the High Country, and it sort of starts in vicinity of Dargo. It's a rocky hill climb and quite steep. So what makes Billy Goat's Bluff so famous? It's the fact that it climbs so high in such a short period of time. So it starts off with a sort of just the standard High Country track, quite sandy, quite dusty and steep. And then towards that last probably kilometre of the track, it gets quite rocky. Depending on what time of year you do it, will depend on how chopped up it is. So I did it in December, and it was quite mild. I did it on the Easter long weekend after a lot of people had driven it, and it was quite hectic. A lot of rock holes sort of formed just from people digging out the track. The difficult part as well with the track is that it's quite narrow, and if there's traffic going either way, it can be a bit of a nightmare. It finishes up by going over the top of this section where the cliff drops up on either side, but the views are spectacular. It is rated by HEMA as a difficult track. However, a stock vehicle can definitely do it. You just got to check to make sure you're taking the correct line the whole way up the hill. You would want a good set of tyres for the hill as well, noting the fact that there's a lot of rocks that can definitely puncture tyres. If it was wet, would you do it? I would recommend no. again, even with quite a modified four-wheel drive, it's quite a slippery climb, and there isn't a lot of places to pull off if there was traffic coming either way. It would become quite a chopped up mess. Plus you're also just going to ruin the track for people who are doing it after that. So I wouldn't recommend doing it in the wet. Coming in at number 2, Blue Rag Range Track. Awesome track. If you like spectacular views and you want to see pretty much the whole of the Victorian High Country from an elevated position, that's the track for you. It's rated as a medium track by HEMA, and it definitely is a medium track. There's nothing too complicated about it. Again, just like Billy Goat's Bluff in some areas, it's just incredibly steep. However, there's not as much of a drop off on either side, and there's a lot more places to overtake and maneuver if there's traffic on the track. It's a bit of a rocky climb, however, you wouldn't need anything more than a stock vehicle to do it. In some sections you might need to engage low range just for those hills towards the end of it. However, it's nothing to be worried about, definitely a stock vehicle kind of track. The best part about Blue Rag Range Track is you start at about 1300 meters of elevation and you end up at about 1700 meters of elevation. So you're up at one of the highest points you can get to in the Victorian High Country. And from there you have a spectacular view to overlook everything. If you've never been to the High Country and you've got only a few days, it's definitely one of the tracks that I would recommend doing. So coming in at number 1 of my favourite tracks that I've done personally, probably no shock to anyone who knows me, it's the Old Telegraph Track. The Old Telegraph Track follows the Old Telegraph line, and it's about 150 kilometres, leaving from Bramwell Junction and heads up north towards Bamaga. Now I guess that probably goes hand in hand with what time of the year you're doing it at. If you're doing it sort of that June-July period, there's probably going to be a lot of water around and then probably a lot of mud around as well. So you'd want a pretty modified vehicle to do it at that point in time. If you're doing it when I did it, which was late September, and sort of as dry as you can get it, it actually wasn't too bad. Look, I probably would recommend a lift kit to attempt the track, and at least a recovery point or a winch. So what is there on the Old Telegraph Track? Look, it's not an overly difficult track in between the obstacles. So you have long stretches where it's just corrugated, maybe a bit undulating, a bit tippy sort of terrain, but again, it's quite a fun drive. If you're new to four-wheel driving, it's probably going to be a bit hectic. However, it's nothing for someone who's done a bit more four-wheel driving and knows the capability of their cars. The challenging parts are the creek crossings and sort of those entrances into that. So I guess personally my most challenging one is Palm Creek. That had the steep drop in and then the pretty steep climb out. I took the regular line for that one. There is also the chicken track which goes around it, which is a bit more mild. The water crossings on the south section are pretty mild. The deepest one is Gunshot. You don't actually have to go obviously down the drop off, you can go around it and then through the water crossing there. You can kind of skirt on the edge of the water crossing and you won't go through some of the deep section. So when you get to the north section, you've got all the beautiful waterfalls, which is just spectacular to do. So once you get past Mistake Creek, that's pretty much the point of no return. So you've got Mistake Creek, then you've got Cannibal, Logan's, Cypress, and Nolan's Creek crossing. Now they're pretty challenging. I actually found Cypress quite difficult just because it was so narrow and it felt quite sketchy. My favourite crossing was Cannibal Creek, which is the one that's got the big turn in it, followed by the Wombat Holes at the end of it. I found that really, really fun. Look, is the Tele track that hard? It's rated as a difficult track on HEMA, and I probably would say it is difficult. Again, like I said, highly depend on the season, and it really does change from season to season. I've seen videos of people doing it in about 2018, and some of the entrances into the creek crossings looked a lot simpler than when we did it. So what would you need to equip your vehicle with to take on the Tele track? Now definitely a snorkel. You'd want a good snorkel set up on your vehicle. I'd probably recommend either recovery points or a winch, so you have some ability to recover your vehicle forwards if you need to get pulled out of a creek. From there, I'd probably recommend a good set of tyres and probably at least a 2-inch lift. If you're a stock vehicle, you probably could do it. However, you're probably going to bottom out on a section or two. Look, there's a number of mods you could do to your vehicle, but that's probably the main ones to get through. So how long should it take you to do the Tele track? I recommend 3 days. We went from Bramwell Junction to Gunshot, which we found a good distance. The next day we really didn't go that far in terms of distance, but we went from Gunshot through to Sam Creek and stayed there. The reason that's good is there's a lot of the waterfalls and the swimming holes on the way. So we stopped in there and took our time on that second day. The third day we did all the challenges, being that from Sam Creek all the way through to Nolans and headed up to Bamaga. So I'd recommend 3 days to do the Tele Track. So that's it, that's my top 5. Look, I've got a lot more things planned. I'm going to be going back to the high country more. I'm going to try and squeeze in some snow trips this year. From there, we'll see what else I can take on throughout the year, but looking to do South Australia as well and experience some of those other tracks. Those are my top 5 for now, and I look forward to doing a lot more tracks in the near future. Thanks for tuning in.